Hello everyone, I hope you're having a great week. So I would like to talk about a lot of different things on this channel, a ton of different topics on my mind, but they all kind of revolve around one thing. So I decided to get the broad topic out of the way right now, so then as I make other videos, we can go back to this one. There's a specific video that I would love to make next month, but it would require this one being out first. Now, I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the Bible has a lot of laws. A lot of laws. You can find a bunch of them in books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy in the Old Testament. But which ones do we follow? Which ones do we see as we need to follow nowadays, and which ones do we see as ones that we can brush aside? Well, that's the topic that I want to talk about today. Separating cultural truth from eternal truth. Now, what do I mean by that? Basically, a cultural truth is something that was meant for the culture of the time, and an eternal truth is something that's meant to be for all cultures of all times. So let's break those down, shall we? Now, let's talk about cultural truths first. Like I said, cultural truths are truths that were meant for the culture of the time. That time period, that culture specifically, maybe a certain tribe of Israel, that kind of stuff. Considering that the Old Testament is thousands of years old, there are going to be some differences. And now some examples of this, I'm going to use 3 examples from the book of Leviticus. The first example that I'm going to give is from Leviticus chapter 11. Now this chapter is dedicated to clean and unclean food. What food the Israelites were allowed to eat and which ones they weren't. The big guideline that it said was this: you may eat any animal that has a split hoof completely divided and that chews the cud. And that brings us to verse 7, which says, and the pig, though it has a split hoof completely divided, does not chew the cud and is unclean for you. So basically, don't eat pig. It also says things like don't eat shellfish. And the second example is from Leviticus chapter 19. This is one titled Various Laws. That just has a bunch of different kinds of things to have. Now, if we look at it in chapter 19, verse 19, we get this: keep my decrees. Do not mate different kinds of animals. Do not plant your field with 2 kinds of seed. Do not wear clothing woven of 2 kinds of material. So don't have wheat and barley in your field. And if you're wearing a shirt that's both cotton and polyester, you're screwed. Wait a minute. Wait. I need to see something real quick. One sec. Just give me a second. Let's see. 60% cotton, 40% polyester. Well, guess I'm going to hell. Later, guys! And the last example that I'm going to give is from Leviticus chapter 15, called Discharges Causing Uncleanness. Specifically, verses 19 through 24. Since it's a rather kind of large passage, I'm not going to read it out since it's not the main thing. However, the gist of it is, if a woman is on her period, she is unclean. Everything she sits on or lays on is unclean. If you touch a woman on her period, you are unclean for the day. And if you have sex with a woman that is on her period, you are unclean for 7 days. It's kind of weird, isn't it? It kind of treats women on their period like they have some deadly disease. It's weird. It is weird. And those are the 3 examples that I thought to give of cultural truths. There are plenty of other ones. Now, let's flip it up. What are eternal truths? Eternal truths are things that are meant for all cultures, all times, all tribes and nations, everyone of all time. These are things that are true for you. One example of this is the 10 Commandments that you can find in Exodus chapter 20. Verses 1 through 17. Basically, they boil down to, obviously, 10 things. Don't have any God before God. Don't worship any idols. Don't take the Lord of God in vain. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and mother. Don't murder. Don't commit adultery. Don't steal. Don't give false testimony. And don't covet. These are 10 rules that I think are pretty applicable for us, even today, and even in the future. These are things that we should definitely hold dear, like don't murder and don't steal ever. Another example of an eternal truth is salvation through Jesus. And, Jesus' story. He was born from a Virgin Mary on Christmas Day. He grew up. He performed miracles. He grabbed 12 besties, he got arrested by the Roman government, he was crucified, 3 days later he rose again. All of that to offer up a way to get into heaven and to show God's love for us. That's also something that I think can apply to us today. And the last thing is baptism. Now that is a bit of a debate between different denominations. Some believing that it is something that's necessary, some people thinking that it's not, but I do believe that it is. The reason I think that is because in Matthew chapter 3, it says this: Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John the Baptist. But John tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? Jesus replied, Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all the righteousness. And other versions of the Bible say that Jesus says we must do all that God requires. So now we have examples of cultural truths and eternal truths. But how do we tell which is which? I've given extreme examples. Ones like if a woman's on her period, you can't touch her or acknowledge her ever until she's out of it. And you can't wear clothing in mixed fabrics. Those are extreme examples of cultural truths. There are even laws about slaves in the Old Testament, and we can easily chalk that up to cultural truth. But what about the less obvious ones? Ones like against eating pork, or against homosexuality, and stuff like that. How do we know which one's cultural and which one's eternal? The context. That's really the best way for us to figure it out. I went to 2 different classes in Bible college. One was called Old Testament Interpretation and one was New Testament. Those basically all boiled down to pay attention to the context. And these textbooks went into the historical context of each of those books of the Bible. And what was the cultural context of these verses? That's what we need to look for. For example, Leviticus was written in like 1400 BC. Thousands of years ago, after the Israelites escaped Egypt and they were on their way to go to the Promised Land so they could make their nation of Israel like God promised they would. As such, it's likely that a lot of these laws were put into place to help make that happen. We also need to acknowledge that what they knew back then was not as much as what we know today. For example, the women on her period thing, that was done again 1400 BC. Nowadays we just know that that's how the female body replenishes its reproductive organs, so if the woman gets pregnant, it's all revved up and ready to go. But people back then likely didn't know that. They probably had some idea that it had to do with sex and reproduction, since it had to do with that area, but they didn't exactly know anything else. Biology and anatomy research wasn't really a thing. So they probably thought, if you're bleeding in a place that you really shouldn't, it must mean that there's something really wrong with you. And also when it comes to eating pork, maybe the pigs that they had back then were just really bad. Maybe they had really bad diseases and they didn't know how to properly cook a pig. So they just kept getting diseases and diseases. So they decided to make it easy by just getting rid of it. And maybe with mixing fabrics, maybe it's just easier to do one kind of fabric back in the day. All of these are different explanations that we can give to different examples of laws in the Bible. We also need to look into the cultural context of the 10 Commandments, Jesus' sacrifice and the meaning that it had, baptism, all that stuff, so then we can figure out what was an eternal truth and what's a cultural truth. Now, people are going to have their different reasons. In fact, there are people of different communities that still believe that eating pork is wrong. They have their own reasons for that. And again, I'm not really going to judge them for that. If they don't want to eat pork, then they don't have to. Why should we try to force them otherwise? So we need to make sure that we look at those and come to our own conclusions about it. That way we can then learn more. Remember my last video about asking questions? This is something that you should ask a question about. Ask about what was the context of each of these different rules in these stories. Why do we need to pay attention to them? Do we even need to pay attention to them? Stuff like that is a good step that we can take to discern what is something that we need to pay attention to now and what's something that we don't need to pay attention to. So there's the video. I'm hoping that we can use this video as a kind of guide to the other videos that I want to make. I would love to make a video next month for reasons I'm sure you could never guess, but I really hope that this could also help you on your journey. If you are trying to figure out what the heck is with all of these weird rules, maybe you can use this to kind of inspire you to look into the cultural context. So, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this summer I'll be able to post a lot more, and I will see you guys next time. Have a blessed week, you guys. Bye!